Hey guys, Robin LeJohn here. Today we're gonna talk about the snare drum. But first, if you haven't checked out the first episode where we're going over the kick drum, make sure to check that out. But now, let's get straight to the snare mixing. Okay, so here's the snare drum in context with the full mix. And here's the snare in solo. Okay, so what I've done now is taken off all the plugins from each individual tracks as well as the snare bus. I also muted the snare reverb. Okay, so here's the snare without any processing at all. Okay, so what we have got here is a snare top mic, and we have a snare bottom mic, as well as a snare one-shot sample. As you see, I have the face flipped on the one-shot sample, and that's because it's not aligned with the top or bottom mic. And as you can, go up and down, up and down, up, down, up, and there's go down, up, down. So when it's flipped, it goes up, down, up instead. Okay, so what I like to start with is the snare top mic. Here we have the virtual tape machine, and the goal with this one is to kind of tame the transient just a little bit to make it more even sounding. So the settings I'm going for here is 15 IPS, I'm going for a 456 type, as well as 2-inch. And the goal here is not to clip the plugin. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna drive it till it clips, and then we're rolling it back off till it barely clips. So as you can hear, it adds a little bit more body to the snare, but the main goal was to tame the transient, and you can hear that by listening to the snare, and it sounds a little bit more rounded than it did before. So first off in the chain, we're using the virtual channel. Okay. So what we got here is we're using the 4K E setting. Okay, so I really like to drive the signal with this one, especially on top snares, because it gives a really nice punchy sound to the snare when it clips and being kind of overdriven. Okay, so next up is the custom series lift plugin. So I don't usually like the present setting on this one, so we're gonna go with silky. And on the low end, I'm usually using the punchy, especially on snares, because it has more of a bell curve than the big one. That's, I guess it's more of a shelf. Okay, so what we're doing now is to try and find a sweet spot where it doesn't sound too harsh, but still gives the snare the right amount of top end. Okay, here I'm trying to find to kind of fatten the snare up a bit, because I feel it's a little bit small. So now we have a really good starting point. We have a nice amount of top end that is not too harsh, and we added a nice amount of punch to kind of fatten the snare up a bit. So here is before. Okay, the lift plugin didn't add enough, so we're going with the FGS EQ as well, just to kind of add some more top end and body to the snare. Okay, so up here on this snare, it doesn't add what we want. It's more of a white noise sound. So we're gonna back it off just a little bit, around between 6 or 7k, around-ish. It gives a nice high-end lift to the snare. So as you may notice, we don't use the bell mode, because for the high-end we want to lift up everything over 6.4k. Okay, so for the low end, for the body of the snare, we're gonna do with bell mode because we want it to be more focused. If we're using a shelf, it's going to sound a little bit bigger, but the low end will be a little bit more uncontrolled. So for snare in particular, we want a nice tight body. Okay, so right off the bat, around 200 the snare sounds a little bit too tubby, so we're gonna add it a little bit lower. And we also want to add a high pass filter just to tighten it up just a little bit. Okay, so far we've basically only used EQ, so here's before. Here's after. Okay, so now we have a really nice amount of top end as well as low end. Next off, we're gonna add some compression. And we're gonna go with a slow attack, fast release, and a 4:1 ratio. I'm going to be pretty brutal on this snare, just to give it a nice punch. Okay, since we're compressing the signal really hard, we need to make up for the loss of volume. So we added 3.3 decibels. So here's before and after. Okay, so since we're boosting a lot with our EQs, we're adding more volume to the signal, as well as when we use the makeup and the drive for the lift. So with the trimmer, we're dialing back around 5 dB. Okay, so here is the snare top before. After. Okay, so here we have the VCC channel on default setting, as well as the custom series equalizer. I really like these preset values. It makes it easier to just kind of spot out some annoying frequencies or to boost frequencies. This high mid filter, usually the 2 and 4K tend to be two areas, especially for bottom snare, that can be kind of troublesome. The 2K area tends to sound a little bit cardboardy / box soundy, whilst the 4K area can have an annoying whistle to it. So yeah, on this one the 2K area kind of sound a little bit too boxy, so we're taking that off just a little bit. As you can hear, with it sounds a little bit cleaner and more open, whilst without it sounds a little bit too boxy. So since this is a snare bottom mic, we kind of want to focus on the snare wires to kind of bring that forth. That kind of gives a nice lift to the wires, but we want to add some more body as well on this one. So we're gonna see which one of these three fits best for this snare. Okay, so on this one the 200 sounds a little bit tubby as well, and the 100 felt a little bit more controlled and tight. So here's the before, and here's the after. So next up is compression, and we're doing the same settings with slow attack, fast release, 4 ratio, and for this one we want to bring forth the wires a little bit more and bring down the punch of the overall snare hit. This is before, with. As you hear, the initial snare hit is pushed down whilst the wires is kind of pushed up in volume, and that's exactly what we want to do with the bottom mic. So next up is the one-shot sample, and we're adding the VCC channel here as well. And I want to kind of spice things up, so I'm gonna change the setting to G. Okay, so I want to drive this a little bit more. I kind of use this also as a volume knob to gain some more volume to the snare. Okay, yeah, the G setting fits best for this one. Okay, for snares I really like the G or E setting. For this one we went with the G, and we kind of drove the input a little bit. We unlinked the input and output, and we raised the output a little bit more to gain some more volume. Next up is the EQ, and we're basically gonna do pretty much the same as we did on the top mic. Since this sample has a little bit more ambience to it, as well as a little bit more top end, we're not adding just as much as on the other one. We added 8, I think, and we're doing half. So let's start with 150. Okay, this one didn't, since it's high tuned, the 150 didn't add as much as I wanted. So we're gonna raise it up just a little bit, 180. A little bit more. Yeah, 190. Okay, just to give some more top end and body to the snare, it's pretty thin sounding on its own. Next up is compression, and we're going with the slow attack, fast release, and 4.1. For samples like this, I kind of like to use the parallel compression mode. What I like to with parallel compression is you can go pretty far with compression without kind of overdoing it, and I feel parallel compression sounds a little bit more natural, at least to me. Lastly, I'm adding a trimmer just to give it some more gain. So here's before, here's after. So here's all the snares together. And here's the snares in context with the drums. So next up is some bus processing. So what I'd like to do is to start off with the EQ on the snare bus, and this I'm gonna do with the rest of the mix going on at the same time. This is kind of what defines how much it's gonna cut out in the mix with just EQ. So here I'm just cutting off some of the low end. Yeah, I feel this needs to cut more, so I'm sweeping around till I find a nice spot where I feel the snare is cutting through. That move on its own make a huge difference. Okay, since I know I'm gonna add some compression afterwards, I'm taking out some of the mid-range. This is just to kind of prevent a paper sounding effect when compressing them. Though you need to be careful to not take out too much mid-range, because that can really make your snare disappear in a mix. Since I'm gonna add compression afterwards, I did it to prevent some kind of paper sounding effect. Okay, so now I'm gonna show you a ringtone that is kind of tamed due to this scoop. This ringtone, as you can hear. It's not gone completely, but that's because I don't want to take out too much of it, because that can kind of destroy the character of the snare, and I think it kind of adds some life to the snare. So next off is compression, and we're going with a 4 ratio, 30 attack, and 100 milliseconds on the release. Okay, so for this compressor I really like the punch mode. Especially for snares, it can really give a super aggressive tone to it and add a really nice amount of punch. And I usually only use this compressor for snare and nothing else. And what I kind of aim for is 6 to 9 in gain reduction. And this one is hitting 9. Sometimes I go a bit lower, but for this kind of snare I want it to be punchy and hit hard so it cut through the mix in a nice way. Next up is another tape machine, and this is because since we added that top end boost on the EQ, we added a lot of white noise sounding frequencies. So when we use the 15 IPS setting, we kinda tame that high end just a little bit. And this time we're probably gonna clip the plugin as well, just to give the snare some more character. And it also adds some more low end punch. Finally, we're adding the DF clip just to get some more volume. I think I might hear a frequency I don't like, so let's solo the snare. Yeah, there we have it. So here's the EQ off and on with the rest of the drums. So now I'm gonna show you the snare reverb. Here's the first one. Here's the second one. Both of them together. With the snare. So here's the final mixed snare in context with the full mix. We could probably add some more gain to it. Here's the drums in solo. Okay, just to recap what we have done today. First, on the snare top, we added the virtual tape machine, and the goal here was to mostly tame the transient. We added the VCC just to drive it and give it some more punch. Okay, so on both of the EQs, we added a lot of high end and low end, just to kind of give some excitement and bring the snare to life. Then we added compression, just to give the snare some more punch. And we added the trimmer to trim it down, since we added a lot of frequencies on our EQs, like 8 here, 10, 7, almost 8. On the snare bottom mic, we used VCC in default mode. Then we added the custom series EQ to boost some 12K to kind of bring the snare wires to life. Took away some 2K. We added body around 100. And we added compression to bring up the wires and bring down the snare hit. Then on the one-shot sample, we added the VCC to add some more punch and volume. We added EQ to kind of give it some excitement in the high end and get some more body. We added some parallel compression to get some punch. And lastly, we added the trimmer to kind of give it some more volume. On the snare bus, we began with EQ, where we started with rolling off the low end a little bit. Since we added a lot of low end on the other mics, we got a nice tight body. And then we took away some of the mid-range to prevent some cardboardy effect when compressing, as well as taking out some of that ringiness that was in the snare. Lastly, we added a top boost to make it cut through the mix. Then we added compression to kind of make it hit harder and feel punchier, and to kind of make it cut through even more in the mix. Then we added another tape machine, and this was to kind of roll off that white noise that became more apparent when we added that top end boost on the EQ. And we kind of got some more body to it and more character. Then we added another EQ just to take out an annoying frequency. Lastly, we added DF clip to give it some more gain, so it could cut through even more in the mix. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to check out the next episode. Then we're gonna talk about room mics and overheads. So stay tuned and thank you for watching.